Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Burdens of Draco podcast. I'm Micah Metz, creator and writer of Burdens of Draco, and with me is Charissa, the artist, and our special guest today is my wife, Maggie Metz. I'm going to shoot this first one at Charissa so Maggie has time to look at it since she is a spur-of-the-moment guest. Matt Henderson will be back hopefully on our next podcast along with a couple other special guests. But he was busy tonight, so we had Maggie join us. Charissa, name your top 3 favorite movies and tell why.
Well, I reject your question and substitute it with my own.
Okay.
So, because I love so many movies, so I'm going to give you the first edition of 3 films, 3 lessons. Okay. Are you ready?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Film number 1 is Pixar's Monsters University. Okay. So I think that a lot of movies resort to inspirational garbage in order to be child appropriate, but this movie does not. The message of Monsters U is that there are some things that you are going to suck at in life, no matter how hard you try and no matter how much you want them. You're just going to suck at them because that's just not what you were built for. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's okay. Instead of fixating on the things that you suck at, you find the things that you are good at and you own them and you excel at them. And that's the lesson in and of itself, but there's a lesson in storytelling too. Don't patronize your audience. You might think that giving your character the thing that they really want will be satisfying to the audience, but ultimately it's not. The satisfaction is empty because it's not relatable. We think we want to see unlikely success, but what we really want is to see a character fail and then have the assurance that failure isn't the end. Mm. So that is movie number 1.
Wow, you really thought about this.
I did. Film number 2 is Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. So I could spend an eternity on every movie in the trilogy and all of the magnificent details therein, but we're going to talk about The Two Towers and specifically the Battle of Helm's Deep. So to make sure that you have this in the right frame of mind, we're dealing with technology from 2001. Think back. CG was very limited, to say the least, and What a Workshop, who helped to do all the visuals in this movie, could not find a program to help them pull off the massive fortress battle of humans, elves, and orcs. So, do you know what they did? No. They freaking made their own. They made their own program. Weta made a program that instilled like CG characters with their own battle AI, like basically a full-on video game. Wow. The skirmishes that you see on the screen are essentially completely organic, and the result is incredible even now, let alone for the 2000s. So the lesson is, if what you want doesn't exist, you make it. And film number 3, which is every Miyazaki movie ever made. We're counting them all as one for the sake of the theme. So, Miyazaki's titles include Howl's Moving Castle, Princess Mononoke, Spirited Away, My Neighbor Totoro, and Ponyo. They're all re-released in the US by Disney with typically like a stellar voice cast. And as a whole, the movies are good. They disregard solid storytelling in favor of stunning animated visuals, which is fine because, I mean, really, they're beautiful. And so I'm willing to overlook a lot of the story errors just because the films are so charming, the characters, and again, they're gorgeous. But that being said, I've noticed that almost all of them end terribly. Like, the plot charges on with a purpose the whole time and then just screeches to a halt and says, well, it's over now. And it's so aggravating. Miyazaki kind of seems to end his films with the assumption that, like, well, you know how the rest goes, right? And we probably do because they're all really predictable, but we still want to see it. We sat through everything else, so show us the satisfactory ending we knew was coming and that we were waiting for. So the lesson here is, no matter what kind of story you're telling, your ending matters. It's the last thing that your audience remembers, and it's ultimately the thing that decides whether or not they like the story you told and whether or not they're going to listen to it again.
True. Yeah, I like that. So for me, the number one, I did not put as much thought into this as Charissa, so my synopsis will not be near as thought out.
I overthink all your prompts, so
I love it. I love that. You overachieve in the best and most creative way possible.
Thank you. Do I get a badge?
You get a book when you're all done.
Oh wow! Thanks.
You're welcome. Chapter 2.
Oh.
Yeah.
Before you've even finished creating it.
No, not when we're all done with the podcast. When she's all done drawing it.
Oh, I thought you meant tonight.
No. Okay.
This is disappointing.
Oh, too bad. So, my first movie is I think it came out in the early 2000s, maybe the 90s. It's been a while, but Castaway. It's one of those movies, and there are lots of these types of movies now, but where a man is put into a situation where he has to find out kind of who he is, what he's made of, and what his breaking point is, and then how they brought him back into that world that he used to be in, and everything had changed, including himself and his realization of that, and just coming to terms with everything that happened on the island. That movie's amazing. It was great acting and all of that. I've watched it several times, but something about that, and just there's not a lot of dialogue. It's a guy and a volleyball, and
Well said.
and that shows you, I love that about the movie, because it shows you his need to socialize, and that we're beings that are built to be in community, and like he had to have something to talk to. So I love that movie. Number 2 would probably be Princess Bride, mostly for the reason that I grew up on it, and my brothers and I watched it over and over and over, to the point where we actually tried to mute it and like say the parts without any sound. So that is just a classic to me, and kind of a family movie. But then the last one there's so many I could choose, because I love movies and storytelling, and there's lots of different movies that have all these cool aspects about them, but I chose one that kind of inspired Burdens of Draco a little bit, and that was Saving Private Ryan. The way that they approached World War II, and these people searching for this private and trying to get him home, and how the gravity of war and how awful it can be. It was very impactful, especially at a time when I watched it, which I think I was in high school, maybe college, and it was just very good storytelling, lots of historically accurate depictions of the battles and stuff like that. And when I was writing out some of the battle scenes and the different things in this universe, the battles matter, the setting matters, but the people and their actions and what drives them matters more. And you could see that in Saving Private Ryan, that there are certain guys, like for instance, Vin Diesel couldn't help himself but run up and try and save a family that was stuck in a house, and he got sniped. And then he was laying there, and they're using him as bait. And that action from him was because he cared so much about those people that he had to risk it and disobey orders and try and get that family. But yeah, so those 3, as well as a bunch of others, but I chose 3 that are kind of my favorites.
3 that I never would have picked for you. I'm just shocked. I really am.
I could have gone all sci-fi. I actually thought about doing Mad Max Fury Road. That's one of my favorites, and I'll just go ahead and talk about it a tiny bit because it also influenced the book.
Why not?
But the main thing with that was it didn't have a script. It was all storyboarded. And I think that's so unique and so cool that, like, I think it was something like over 3,000 panels of just meticulously story-driven drawings, and how that sculpted a movie that has very little dialogue. It's pretty cool. But anyways,
well, I was just gonna say that you want to know the movies that I would have picked for you.
oh sure, that would be interesting to hear.
Oh no, it's Batman, Batman Begins, and Dark Knight Rises.
I love those movies. I really do. And
I just thought we were gonna have a flush of Batman.
Good
Maggie.
guesses, but not quite. Go for it, Maggie.
Well, I'd just like to preface this by saying that I didn't have much time to prepare for this, so these are not my 3 favorite movies ever, but rather the first 3 movies that came to mind.
I like it.
Which means that I liked them because I don't often remember movies or anything about them. It's one of the things that Micah envies about me, because he says he wishes that every time he would rewatch a movie, it would be a fresh, new experience, as it is for me. But he is one to remember every detail about movies. The fact that I even remember these movies says a lot. So for number 3, I have Donnie Darko.
Ooh.
And it's basically just a go-to movie. I like that I didn't get it for like the first 20 times that I watched it. Since that first watch, I've probably seen it, I'm not even kidding, 35 to 40 times. And the first probably 10 to 15 times, I was just like so enamored and enthralled at the sheer complexity of it. And I think that's why I kept watching it, because I just wanted to get it and understand it on a more, on a deeper level, I guess. So that's why I like Donnie Darko. Number 2, I have Suicide Squad. And I don't know, I think that movie was just so dark and twisted. I don't know, it's just fun for me to kind of go to a dark place that somebody else creates.
I didn't know you had such a dark side, Maggie.
Is it
I
because
definitely
it's all
do.
villains instead of all heroes? Is
think,
that the
yeah, yeah, I don't know. I like the Joker. I think he.
You like that version of the Joker? Is it your favorite, or would you say Heath Ledger's was better?
I don't know. They're just different.
Such a big argument between.
They're different, though. I don't like
world.
saying better or worse because they're 2 different actors. I like each of them, but they're very different.
Thank you for saying that. I agree. I can't stand when people compare character acting.
Yeah.
It's 2 different people playing 2 different parts.
Mm-hmm.
They both embody the same type of character, but the thing is, and I'm sorry I'm taking over a little bit. The thing is, with comics, there are so many iterations of Joker and Batman throughout the comics that you can't have one Joker. There's so many.
Yeah.
There's so many Batmen.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we just watched an animated Batman just the other day that was about him being a detective and chasing down Jack the Ripper. And it was back in the 1900s. Like, it's a different version of Batman. So that's something that is commonly mistaken. Oh, he's the best Joker. No, he's a different version of a character, You liked the one version better, but that doesn't mean the other one wasn't a good performance.
Yeah.
Okay.
Number 1, Maggie.
Number 1. So the one that came to mind first that stood out most was Inside Out.
Oh.
And that is probably because I'm a therapist. And so I like psychology and emotions and feelings. So this Inside Out is all about feelings, the feelings of a little girl. And I don't know, I just love the depiction of all of our feelings being inside of our head, and all of our feelings are always present, but there's one particular feeling that is always, or emotion, I guess, that is always guiding our behavior and the language that we're using. And I don't know, it's just such a simple movie, but the idea behind it is so complex that it made me laugh and it made me cry. And
So much crying.
usually when a movie does that, I really enjoy it. If it can tap into multiple emotions of mine, then it's a winner. One of my favorite quotes from that movie comes from Sadness, and Sadness at one point said that crying helps me slow down and obsess over the weight of life's problems. And that just struck me so hard when I was actually in the movie theater. My mom and I went to see this movie together, and I don't know, I just can so relate to that sometimes. Like, sometimes you just need to have a little cry and really just be in your sadness and your sorrow and experience it in order to let it go. So work through certain things and rough patches that I come across that has been helpful to me.
So you have a
Great
dark
answers.
side and a melancholy side.
I do.
She has
I
lots
love
of
it.
sides. I'm still trying to figure her out.
I'm an octagon. Maybe there's something with more sides than an octagon. I don't know the term for it, but
And they did a good job in that movie of really sitting in the moments. Which brings me to my thought about Burdens of Draco, because I'm always going to try and bring it back to that. Not just going to talk about other stuff on the podcast. It'll be mostly
Called
about
Burdens
Burdens
of
of Draco. Yeah. But for all you who are wondering, it will get happier. That first issue, and maybe even a little bit of that second issue when you see it. It's pretty dark. It's pretty intense, which makes the levity and the other good times and things stand out so much more, and it'll cause those good moments to be more memorable. It's on purpose, and it's building gravity and building a basis for living in those emotions and where the world is at that they live in. It has to be embodied and seen in the comic. I can't just say everything was hard and things were bad, and then I show characters jumping and playing. Like, you can't do that and be effective in the storytelling. So we've talked about how we've met, and I'm talking about Charissa, how we've met and how the comic started. But could you give a more specific idea of your process when it comes to producing art? And I remember you came out on Facebook and on Instagram with that short little storyboard. I think it was like 9 or 10 page little explanation of how you get from one stage to the next. But I think there's a lot more that goes into it.
Yes. It's, I don't know. I feel like every time I do something, it's like totally random to that day, and it just, however it works is how it works. But I guess we kind of wanted to go in the direction of like, how do Micah and I manage to turn a bunch of words into a bunch of pictures instead? Even then, I don't think we even really know. But
yeah, it's definitely still a learning process.
Yeah, it's a learning process. But I mean, obviously, I start by reading the script. And then from there, like, I ask you all of my questions and all of my initial questions, because I continue to ask questions all the way up until the end. After I get my questions answered, we pretty much go right into storyboarding, which is our first pass, kind of deciding which parts of the script are the most important and what we should emphasize. Like, usually I pick out certain scenes, especially certain feelings and emotions that I want to emphasize, either to set the mood or just to figure out what best helps the story to progress forward. Because we have a certain page count to keep, so some things have to get cut, which we decide on together. We rework the story as necessary, but it's not quite as painful as it sounds, like, to just cut stuff out. Because I think when you add the visual element, there are some things that are written into the script that are just clearly superfluous by that point. Because when you think about it, like there are some moods and motivations and relationships that you can explain with a single expression that take so much longer to explain in words. So making that transition from a script to a storyboard it's a lot easier to pare down than it seems, just because there are some things that, oh, we didn't need as many panels to talk about that as we thought.
Yeah.
And so once we're set on the storyboard, I get to work like on the beginnings of the actual comic. And as I work, I tend to find better ways to visually express the story. So there are a lot of changes from the storyboard to the finished page, which I think we talked about that at one point, that I used to feel like I had to show you all those changes, and now it's just kind of a surprise.
Yeah.
Unless I feel really unsure about it.
And that might be cool for fans to hear. You recently sent me an unfinished, but getting there, 28-page comic to review, to get some changes in there and move forward with the process. But a lot of that stuff I hadn't seen yet, but you're almost there. So it's like you would show me things here and there, but I didn't get the full picture. I step out after, I would say pretty much after the storyboard process, I'm much less involved, and it's more question answer.
You become a consultant.
Yeah. Since we're talking about this process, about rewriting and refining as well, and how many times things need to be changed for the sake of art, because I think that is an important part to understand if you're talking about comics, or if you're interested in doing them, or you're just curious. For us, a lot of time, like the script's already written, all 300 pages or whatever it is. I've lost count because every time I edit, I either pare down or add things, and it's changing, but not in big ways, minor things. But it's all done. But that doesn't mean that every time we approach a new issue, I don't rewrite and tweak things. For instance, chapter 3 had been completely retweaked and changed, and we actually changed something major in chapter 2. That was a pretty big deal. So that happens. It takes a lot of time. You have these really, really important things in your mind that have to be told in your story, and they really don't need to be told. It's something you think is really cool, or a line of dialogue that might be just hits the mark just right to give a certain feeling, and you think it's awesome. And then I'll read back over it years later, because back when I wrote this, it was, I've done several edits, but I don't read the whole thing through every time I edit necessarily. A lot of times I'm looking for words or errors or things like that. It's not always reading. And I'll read the chapter and I'll be like, oh, that's a dumb line, or that doesn't fit, or they would never say that. So there's a lot of changes for the sake of characters or dialogue that needs to be tweaked in order for it to sound like that person. So that's always taken into the process every time we do a chapter. So that adds, not really, I would say, what do I do? Like 2-3 days I usually can get through a chapter. I actually did chapter 3 while you were storyboarding chapter 2, I think.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Because I got so excited. I can't help it. Something else I wanted to talk about, and it's something I'm working on the side, and I'm not sure when it's going to come out. I'm going to work with Matt, who is the co-writer of the archives, and we're working on a little side story, but we want to build up several pages before we start releasing anything. Wait and see, but it'll be cool. It's just a rough idea, kind of a side story of a guy. I don't want to give too much away, actually. It's about a guy.
It's about a guy.
But the idea was that we would have a side story that runs along this main story and every once in a while intersects, but is very much its own story and has its own feel. And we would release a couple pages a month until it was all done for free, just on the website, on social media, just to look at and check out and follow a story. And it would be very much novel form. So that's something that I'm working on. I actually wrote some on it today. I've already outlined all of it, so I have the story there. It's just not there yet, but that's something that's hard for a creative, and I'm sure you can attest to this. I know I've seen several other drawings and projects that you've worked on while working on the comic. Like, creative outlets are huge for that type of thinker, to just, oh, this looks really cool, I need to write that down, or this looks really cool, I need to draw that. And having to have those outlets. I know if I didn't have time to write or draw built into my schedule and making sure I could do that, I would go crazy. I need that outlet.
I am working on a completely unrelated painting right now while we're talking. So
Yep. That makes sense. Like, that is totally what I would expect. It's just it's something about being able to release that creativity and create something yourself and be able, not only that, but if I made this story and I couldn't share it with anybody, it wouldn't matter if I made the story. A huge part of this comic is sharing it with people, and so share it with your friends. That's like, sharing the experience is what it's about. So if you love it, like I love it, I'm working hard to share it with people. Not because I want to make a bunch of money. I lost money on the first comic, and I'll probably keep losing money for a while. Doesn't matter. I want to share my story. I'm passionate about what this is. That's where that creativity comes from. Off my soapbox.
Basically, you're saying we're made of money, so we can just keep making comics and shelling out the dough for it.
Oh, yeah.
All about it.
Yep. So, Maggie, you have a unique perspective because from the beginning, you've kind of been here, been next to me, been by my side while I was writing and creating and trying to get an artist and trying to get it edited and trying to do all these different things. And you were there the whole time. So could you share a little bit about what your experience has been with this project?
Man, when you first presented this idea to me, we were in Kansas and you were doing the RD thing, and I don't think I had started my master's yet, but I was thinking about it. I was close. I had applied probably. And you basically told me that you had like this God moment where you had this story in your head, basically from start to finish. It was just downloaded into your brain. And I'm thinking, this is crazy. Like,
you married a psycho.
Like, what are you talking about? This whole story, this world, this new world is in your head. And so you start writing, and you're writing for hours and hours every day. And I honestly just thought, okay, man, like, we're doing this. Like, I don't know, not that I didn't have faith in you. I just was kind of skeptical. Like, this was a new thing for me. Like, you hadn't ever thought of a new world. So, yeah, honestly, I was just kind of taken aback and like very strange, but sometimes that's how God works, in strange and mysterious ways. So, as you continued to write this story and share with me the type of world that it was and the characters, I think I slowly started buying into it and appreciating it. Slowly, though. Like,
You gotta admit, though, it was really bad at first.
No.
The first writing was a book.
Right,
And
right,
and it
yes.
was horrible.
Well, no. The book wasn't horrible. It just wasn't meant to be a book. So
I still have the book in my closet, and no one can see it.
So the
Ever.
the book was just a lot, like just a lot of words and a lot of information all at once, and it just didn't make sense that it was a book. As it started to become and transform into a comic, it I don't know, I guess it came to life, and it wasn't just this like overwhelming universe. It became pictures and
something tangible.
Yeah, something that made sense rather than just literally the only word that keeps coming to my mind is overwhelming.
Yeah,
it was just really
like
overwhelming as a novel.
Yeah, it was a mess of ideas.
Yeah. So back to your question. I feel like your question had more to do with like what was it like for me. So that was more of a what was it, but what was it like for me? Looking back, I can now see that like the transformation of it all and how amazing it has been to be with you through all of it. But I think in the beginning I don't know, I guess kind of scary because I felt like you had poured so much of your heart into it, and I didn't know, like I honestly couldn't have told you that anything would have come of it. And I remember when we were expecting Grayson, you were like you met Charissa and things started really rolling. And I remember thinking, well, if nothing else, you can share it with Grayson, and like I'm sure he'll think it's super cool, and like so it's not all for nothing, because if nothing else, then our son will get to see something that his dad created. But now that I see what it's becoming and the people that are being impacted by it, and you go to talk at youth groups and schools about it and share a greater message than even just the message of the comic. And now I have complete faith that it could be global, or I mean, you could just reach so many people through this medium. And so I'm like proud of you now. So it's been this total process for me of a spiraling of all the way from complete doubt and just like thinking you're kind of crazy to just complete and total faith and pride in your work.
Oh, she loves you.
Yeah.
Aww.
She stuck with me even when I was crazy.
Or I thought you were. It sounded like you were crazy.
Yeah, I remember that. And I remember being very surprised at how much you let me write and how many hours a day you let me write and how much you let me just pursue all this stuff. And then I said, hey, the first issue is going to cost this much of our own money. And you're, okay, let's do it. And I was like, really? All right, let's do it.
Yeah, of course.
And that steadfast belief in me was huge. Like being able to pursue my dreams with the support of my wife. If I didn't have her support, there wouldn't be Burdens of Draco at all. Like I would have stopped a long time ago because I wouldn't have had any confidence that the story was any good. I mean, every time I wrote something, I read it to her. So she's heard all this over and over and over. As far as the story is concerned, she's heard every change, every little bit of it. You sat by and listened to me tell my story and all those different aspects of being a supportive wife, even though it wasn't necessarily something that you would go out and listen to for fun. It was something that you supported me in anyways, because that's such a huge part of being able to do things that you love to do, is having the support of others, whether it's your wife or your friends or whoever, but especially those you're close to.
Mhm.
So you guys know, if you don't remember, the second issue is 28 pages instead of 23. Instead of 20, I wrote it to be 20, and that's another adjustment we made. We felt that I'd crammed too much in, and that's what I try to do with each issue, is cram a bunch of cliffhangers, excitement, all those types of things in there, because I want it to be an impactful issue every issue. And you didn't get that issue and be like, wow, that was, I waited that long for that. Like, nothing happened. So there's always something happening, but sometimes I misjudge how many pages it takes to do.
Just a little. I mean, what I said about lots of words being reduced to a few pictures, the inverse also applies. Sometimes it takes a lot of pictures to convey like just a couple words. There were a couple of those in this last one where it was like, there are not enough pages to make this happen.
Right. And that's when we talk over and we figure it out. And I said, oh man, 5 more pages? That's a lot of money. Let's do it.
Yeah, that's kind of what
I think
happened.
it deserves it. Like, if the story deserves it, that's what needs to happen, because that's what's gonna. You don't cut people off in the middle of a story arc that you created for a chapter. Like, it's just, that's not a good way to save money. I have a couple other questions. I'm gonna go ahead and limit those to just one more. That way, this podcast doesn't go quite as long as the first one. Might have already. I haven't looked at the clock, but oh no, it hasn't. It's not even close. That's perfect. We're running.
I mean,
right on
Matt's
time.
not here, so.
Oh, true. We miss you, Matt.
But you're long.
We do.
Just kidding.
Maggie also knows Matt, and we're friends with them, so she's not just talking to a random stranger.
No.
I would like to talk a little bit about kind of what I listened to while writing Burdens of Draco and what I listen to when I write now, mostly because music is such an important part for me of creativity. It inspires emotions and feelings, and actually I choose music based on what kind of thing I'll be writing. That's a big reason that I had the first chapter have a 11-song soundtrack by a bunch of different artists, because I just wanted them to hear about the story, hear about what it was going to be like, and then create something based on that. And that's what they did. And we'll be doing a few more songs for the second one that same way, as well as my friend Trevor Kimball produced what's called a living comic, I believe is the term. I'd never really heard of it before, but basically he took the digital version of the comic and panned through it slowly and produced music for it. And Maggie and I voice acted for it, and he did sound effects as well. And it kind of feels like a animated movie of stills flowing through the comic, and it's very immersive, and I'm very excited for you guys to see it. I plan on releasing it about a week before issue 2 comes out, so if you have friends that haven't read it and want to catch up for free and see a cool immersive version of the first issue, they can do that. So music is very important, and I was wondering if, Charissa, you listen to anything specific when you draw?
The answer is yes. And actually, I thought about, because you sent me these questions ahead of time when I read it, I remembered that was actually one of the first things that I asked you when I started working on the comic. I asked you if you had any soundtracks that you listened to while you were writing Burdens.
I totally forgot about that.
Yeah, and part of that is I really wanted to understand you and what you were doing, because we didn't know each other at all. And then the other part is that I like to listen to thematically appropriate music for an immersive drawing experience. Like Okay, one time I was working on a pirate-themed illustration, and so I listened to the Assassin's Creed Black Flag soundtrack, like, on repeat.
Nice.
And then occasionally I would switch to, like, the sea shanties from it, overlaid with ocean sounds. It is a truly immersive experience. So, I mean, for me, like, the more immersed you are in the story that your art tells, the better you yourself tell the story.
Mhm.
So, I think the first track that you gave me was the Oblivion soundtrack, the movie, not
by
the game.
M83 and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, awesome sound.
Yeah, it's a solid track, and it definitely helped me work and get into the sci-fi mood, because again, sci-fi is not really my forte. So it helped me go into that frame of mind. But of course, I spend a lot of time drawing, so after a while, all music is terrible, and I don't want to listen to anything. So to break things up, I actually ended up watching all of Parks and Rec from start to finish while drawing the first chapter. So
It's very different from
it is
the tone of the comic, but
I know. So if Chris
took your
Pratt
mind to
accidentally
it.
shows up in the first volume, I'm sorry, but it's just how it goes.
I didn't see him. I didn't see him or the big hole behind his house.
Oh, there was a hole in the Darcy's in the pit. It is a pit.
She fell in the pit. She fell in the pit.
I sing that song to myself occasionally.
It gets me through tough times.
It does. It's really, I feel like he's there for me.
I'm glad you mentioned that Oblivion soundtrack. I actually, at some point, I switched from iTunes over to listening to Spotify playlists, and I didn't put that one over onto my Spotify playlist, so that is going to be a treat. I haven't listened to it in a while.
There you go.
Man, I have two main go-tos right now that I write to, and that would be Mad Max Fury Road. It is a very intense soundtrack and very well done. And then the other soundtrack is another this is much less intense and more atmospheric and almost somber, a little bit sad, is the Last of Us soundtrack.
That's a solid soundtrack.
Very, very good. Very good for feeling those moods of just those normal scenes where there might be some people connecting on a deeper level, either through conversation or just a look or something. And that soundtrack has so much feeling in it, even though it's mostly acoustic guitar. There's not a whole lot in there.
And it's pretty repetitive too, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty repetitive, and there's definitely a theme that runs through a lot of the songs.
But it makes my melancholy spirit happy. That little
It's not so sad that it makes you feel sad. It's dark, but you kind of feel at peace, like walking through a forest on a hike trail by yourself, like that type of feeling. So those are the two main ones I listen to right now, and I think that brings me to kind of the final thing I wanted to say is we're hoping, I can't promise anything, but we're hoping that both Trevor Kimball, the guy who created the Living comic and the soundtrack for that, as well as AJ Burning, who created one of my favorite tracks on the original Chapter 1 soundtrack, will join us for the next podcast and talk about creativity and producing music for something like this. So we are hopeful that they'll join us. I can't promise anything, and if not, it'll definitely be Matt, Charissa, and I for the next one. Matt, you can't get out of this next one.
You're stuck.
You're stuck with us. So thank you so much for tuning in, listening, supporting the comic. We're coming up very soon. I know I say soon all the time, but as you heard in the podcast, if you were listening closely, she sent me the 28-page comic to review and look at. So it's coming soon. And we'll be doing a release party, and I'll have details about that. One last little announcement in case you didn't notice. I had mentioned on Facebook I was going to sell those 2 canvases to the highest bidder. Well, no one bid. So as humbling as that is, I didn't necessarily expect anyone to go crazy. I put the price that I paid for them. And what I'm going to do instead, because I really value the people that show to the signings and the things like that to support us, since no one bid on them, I'm going to give them away at the release party for Chapter 2. I'll do some type of special raffle or something like that, and people can enter, and maybe you'll win it, and you'll get both canvases signed by both of us, and those are one of a kind, so that could be something really cool. But yeah, that's it, and we thank you for joining us. See you again next time for episode 3.